Yeah.
And if I were to I made it. I made it to
Well, they're
work.
all in the background.
I just, you just go slower and
You
you
go
get
slower.
it. But I get a lot of people don't, so.
Okay. I think we're going to go ahead and start. It's a minute or two after 8. Jackie is running a few minutes late. Else is accounted for. Okay. This is a work session. It's for discussion only. There will be no action taken at this time. The charge, as everyone is aware, was made from the board to FIAC on February 19th, 2013. And one of the items in the charge was taken care of, what has that been, over a year ago with Pangborn? And then the two remaining to develop an attendance zone for the new West City Elementary and to develop other attendance zone realignments as necessary. I did go on the web page. This report is on there. It's a 2-click link, very quick, easy to get to, pretty intuitive. So it is available for the public. I'd like to just take a moment to read from the letter that we received from the FIAC committee. We are considering today 14 recommendations. There are, as it says here, FIAC has made deliberate decisions to maintain contiguous boundaries, consider the impact of future capital projects planned by the board, and to make recommendations that are efficient and impact the least number of citizens and students possible. They also acknowledge that it is the elected board's final decision to approve any attendance zone alignment and hopes that their recommendations will be helpful in that effort. I'd like to thank the co-chairs who are with us today, Mrs. Newby and Mr. Oliver, and the entire committee and staff for the effort and the due diligence that they bring to these recommendations. I guess a little process here. Do you mind if the board members interrupt during the discussion, or would you like us to hold questions to the end?
Any way that works for the board.
And I do think it's important at the end of the meeting, before we break up, that we discuss next steps so we know exactly where we're going.
And Mr. Trotta has a document that I think would be helpful to the board, so maybe save just a few minutes for him to review that with the board members.
Perfect. Thank you. And Dr. Wilcox, some words?
Yes, thank you. A couple of things. One, just organizationally, it's important to remember that the FIAC committee met 9 times over the last 10 months. They've reviewed over 28 different proposals, and they're presenting 14 different proposals to you today. Again, all subject to discussion because the board is the final authority in that. as you think about them, I think it's important to view them really in three groups. There's the group one proposals that I think really create new boundary realignments for West City. Then there's group two, which are some related things to take care of Winter Street. And then finally, there are just some things that we want to clean up. I think there are 4 recommendations in group three. That said, I'm going to turn it back over to Boyd and the team, and they'll walk you through each of them. And as Mrs. Brightman said, we would benefit from your knowledge and expertise, so please don't hesitate to ask the questions that are important to you and to your constituents. And then what I've asked the team to do is to explain their rationale, not necessarily to debate a location, but to explain, here's what we thought during that, and then they'll take all of this information back and rethink their recommendations. Okay? With that, Dr. Michaels.
Okay. Good morning. I'd like to add my thanks to staff and to the FIAC members, and particularly our co-chairs for coming out this morning. A lot of work has gone into this part of the process. It's been over a year since they presented their Pangborn recommendations, and they've been working on a whole series of possible ideas and have boiled it down now to the 14 recommendations that have already been discussed. Our plan for this morning is to try to have Chad basically walk through each of the recommendations. We'll take as much time as necessary. The board is welcome to ask questions. We do have the capability of zooming in any particular area that you really want to look at. What street is that? Does that connect to this? Patrick has one screen set up that way that we're prepared to zoom into any area that you'd like to look at. So feel free to stop Chad at any point. With that, I'd just like to offer an opportunity for our 2 co-chairs to make any comment, and we'll jump right into the presentation, and Chad will lead that.
Morning. I do want to reiterate that, as was mentioned, we did, over a period of a year, meet and come up with the 14 recommendations that we do hope will be helpful in your determination as to what direction you as a board want to go to. One of the things that I particularly noticed is we've really looked at the attendance zones for West City and the closing of the other 2 schools, but then as we've kind of moved and expanded that a little bit, I think we've taken a number of the areas and looked at some of the state-rated capacities, and I think you are going to see in a before picture those capacities were dramatically different, some being higher and lower, whereas we've been able to bring them all into a more finite, condensed version, and I think it becomes better and better usage of all the facilities within the county that way, within the elementaries areas. So I think it's been a positive type thing, and hopefully you'll see that as we go through the presentation here.
Good morning. I just want to reiterate what Mrs. Brightman read in our charge, that we tried to make sure that we completed our task and also tried to impact the fewest number of students possible, but maintaining a lower level of state-rated capacity in some schools and raise some of that state-rated capacity, not the number of students in schools that had a lower state-rated capacity. I want to thank, on behalf of the FIAC committee, the support from the Washington County support staff. They were very helpful and very professional in all of our work. And I hope that during this process you feel comfortable asking us some questions about our decisions.
Okay. I'm going to try to briefly walk you through the report and each of the recommendations in the report. As was already mentioned, this was a 3-part charge that was received by the committee February of 2013. The first portion of this charge has been completed with the associated Pangborn redistricting. The remaining 2 components of this charge are to create a new West City Elementary attendance zone and to develop other attendance zone realignments as necessary. As we mentioned, we met 9 times. We looked at 28 different attendance zone realignment options and distilled those into 14 recommendations that are identified in the report. On page 3 of the report, one of the things that was highlighted was that the committee reviewed 2 different enrollments during this work. The official September 2013 enrollment and the official September 2014 enrollment for not only all of the schools that were impacted, but also for each of the areas. and each of the amounts of students that would be impacted by the recommendations, those areas were also reviewed for both enrollment cycles to see an average number and to verify that they were staying fairly consistent over the past 2 years and actually over the past 5 years. And again, all of that information is included in the report. Probably the most important chart in the report is found on page 4. And we'll probably be going back and forth and referencing this a little bit. This chart identifies recommendations number 1 through 13 on the 14 impacted elementary facilities, and it identifies their current projected 2018 enrollment. The 2018 enrollment is what the committee looked at to determine towards the future in conjunction with the considerations as identified by the board's charge to kind of gauge where we needed to be, how many students needed to move in and out of each attendance zone in order to create an appropriate plan. So looking at this chart, in green, you can see the recommendation numbers and the total number of K through 5 students that are recommended to be moved in to each of the attendance zones. So, for example, Bester Elementary, it says recommendation number 8 and 10. That identifies that it's the 2 recommendations for that area to move those students into Bester Elementary's attendance zone. And during the course of this work, there were 75 students in 2013 and 67 students in 2014. Moving over to the pink blocks, it identifies the recommended numbers, total number of K through 5 students recommended to be moved out of each attendance zone, and those associated values for the 2 years that we looked at it. The most important blocks, obviously, are the 2 yellow blocks, which identifies the resulting projected 2018 enrollment information based on all of the FEAC's proposed recommendations. And as you can see, Conococheague and Winter Street Elementary both result in 0, and West City Elementary results in a populated enrollment. The report's organized pretty simply. It's got some background information at the start, an executive summary, goes through the methodology. The committee included a summary of their discussion and the work so you could understand some of the background on how some of these recommendations came to be. And then each group is separated in the report to try to simplify it. As Dr. Wilcox had identified earlier, each group actually contains the charts that we'll be looking at in this PowerPoint of each recommendation, a brief written boundary description of the area, comments that describe the general impact of that and other associated areas to each facility. And then after each of the charts, each group contains the 10 considerations that were identified in the charge by the board and as they were discussed by the committee. So moving in, we'll maybe start with group 1, and I'm going to be a little mobile as I probably will work off this screen to describe the boundaries. I'll try to speak up a little bit. Boundary realignment recommendation assigns approximately 260 students from the Salem Elementary become part of the new West City Elementary. And the way these maps are depicted, the area that actually shows the world imagery, current Salem Avenue Elementary attendance. The portions that are in the transparent purple are those areas of that recommendation that are recommended to be the new West City Elementary School. We've identified where the West City Elementary School is located. It's actually kind of in 2 pieces, so we'll look at both pieces. First piece is actually West City Elementary, and this is the Hager's Crossing development. So for those maybe not familiar with it or at home, Walmart, my favorite, McDonald's, right at the entrance of the light. This is actually an existing development. There's approximately 155 to 160 students inside in this development that will be able to walk to the new West City Elementary attendance. As you can see, there's also certain lots that are currently in conceptual phase.
How many more lots are?
172 in conceptual phase. It's identified in the report. I have to.
Sorry,
I
I'll
didn't include
look.
that chart though. Yeah, that is included.
Thanks. Okay.
Yes, sir. Okay, I will. Thank you. The second portion of the first recommendation area is the southwestern portion of the existing Salem Avenue Elementary 10th zone. To kind of follow along, of course, here's Interstate 81. And this is US West Avenue, and then as it comes to Nottingham Road, and then down to actually what would be East Place Gateway Crossing development, Lincolnshire Elementary attendance bound. Westernmost portion. You see back their landmark right at the top of the. But that would be the.
Did you say that whole area was Salem Avenue?
Yes, ma'am.
That whole area?
The whole purple area is currently attending Salem Avenue Elementary.
Thank you.
And what's shown in gray there to the left is Lincolnshire?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Recommendation number 2 reassigns approximately 97 K through 5 students from the closed part of the new West City Elementary. I'm not sure why the maps have moved, but this is the existing Conacajig Elementary attendance zone. And the purple portion here is the portion that we're looking to be moved to the new West City Elementary as part of the recommendation. Here we go. So to kind of give a little bit of viewpoint, this red line is 40 as it comes into Hagerstown. Here's Interstate 81. The existing Conacajig Elementary school resides right here. A couple landmarks. There's the landfill. As you can see, this is kind of bordered by the Conacajig Creek as it kind of wraps around. Hagerstown Speedway's up in the far corner, and it comes down to Interstate 70 on the south. This here, I believe, is the Highland Center development off of Greencastle Pike. There's a Sheets Pike in 40. The basic distance from Hagerstown Speedway to the new West City that's about 8 minutes of travel. The new school facility.
And all of that was Conacajig, correct?
Yes,
No
ma'am.
other schools involved yet? Okay.
Chad, I think we took into account there that those students there, from a transportation standpoint, would be quicker for them and did not include some of that other area because they'd have to cross the Conacajig and they'd actually have to go around, and it would be sort of circuitous to do that.
That's correct. So all the students residing in this area, as Mr. Oliver pointed out, the roads would tie in either to Greencastle Pike, which would go up to US 40, or directly tie into US 40, and it would be a straight shot over to the new elementary school facility. Recommendation number 3 reassigns approximately 26 K through 5 students from the Lincolnshire Elementary attendance zone to become part of the new West City Elementary. So we'll go through this area is the existing Lincolnshire Elementary attendance zone. So recommendation number 3 is for the area that's shown in purple to go to the new West City, which is designated at the top of the page. This area, to kind of give you a little bit of a bearing on where it is, the double red lines on top are US 40. It's actually bisected by West Washington Street. It kind of cuts right through the top. Now, this is a heavy industrial area down through here. Obviously, it's got the Tractor Supply along Interstate 81, the stone plant. The main area of students is actually between US 40 and West Washington Street. So one of the things the committee looked at was that these students would be able to be picked up, routed back out to US 40 and up to the new school, or loop over and picked up the area in recommendation number 1 that was discussed from Salem Avenue, and also take those back up to the new.
So Mrs. Harshman or Mrs. Williams, one of you made the comment, you know, that gray section next to, when you were looking at that Salem, that's in Lincolnshire, that's this area. So it kind of looked disconnected when we were only talking about Salem. Now it connects the Salem piece with the Lincolnshire move, which will connect to the West City part.
The fourth final boundary line re-signs approximately 23 students become part of the new. This is actually set up in 2 pieces as well. So the existing Mulligansville Elementary attendance zone is the big picture of world imagery that's shown here. Here's the current Mulligansville Elementary School, and the bigger that make up this recommendation basically kind of go along McDade Road, which comes up and ties into Broadfording Road, Boulevard, and Hager's Crossing, the proposed school. So that's the first portion of this area. The second portion, and I'm going to show you how all these tie together to create a single boundary here in a second. But the second portion resides along Greencastle Pike. So all the residences here come over to Greencastle Pike and come down to US 40, and then would be able to go over the new facility. So maybe taking a quick look, and I'll point out each of the recommendation areas. Recommendation number 1 includes this piece and this piece from Salem Avenue. Recommendation number 2 includes this center piece from Conacajig. Recommendation number 3 includes this portion from Lincolnshire Elementary School. And the fourth and final recommendation includes this piece and this piece from Mulligansville Elementary.
Follow property line. You don't want to bisect the property with the line. So property sits on this farm. It might go back many acres. So you see these odd-shaped peninsulas.
So if you look in the report, West City Elementary projected to be approximately 94% of its state-rated capacity in 2018. It also provides it an area of a high density of non-transportable students, or students that could walk to the new school. Again, about 160 at this point in time, and it leaves a little bit of room for growth if that development takes off and we see additional homes come in the Hager's Crossing area.
That line of thought on future growth and development in that entire new district. What would we be back having to put children back out, pull them out of that district and realign at some point? And how do you see that?
If anything, some of the discussions from the committee was to leave a little bit of extra room at that school to accommodate the additional build-out of Hager's Crossing. I believe, I'm going to cheat off Wayne here, on page 22, we identified the 3 subdivisions that are in that area. I believe AMS and Powers Estates, for the most part, are, from what we've heard from the limbo, and we're really just looking at the Hager's Crossing development. One of the components of the discussion of Collegiate Acres. Future need for us to go and look at Collegiate Acres and potentially provide some relief with this facility. But again, that remains to be seen. It kind of depends if it becomes similar to what we saw at Cortland Manor, or if it remains similar to what we actually really see at most of the multifamily homes in the county.
Morgansville district right now, but it's directly adjacent, right?
Right. That's correct. So currently, students from the townhomes in Collegiate Acres go to Morgansville Elementary. They're in construction for students, or they're in construction of the apartment complexes over the next several years. Those are not completed yet, and we don't believe it's going to be similar to Cortland Manor, but then at the time we didn't think Cortland Manor was going to work out the way it did for Pangbourne, which prompted the first part of this charge. So that was all discussed and considered by the committee as we move forward with this process.
Have we contacted the permits departments for the county and asked if there's any potential big developments coming into the area in the next 5 years?
Yes, sir, we have. Trying to figure out how to answer your question accurately. Of course, we keep in constant contact with any conceptual design. So on the development sheet, where you see units in concept phase, that means they have to go through the APFO process, and they don't really have the ability to go out and get a permit. It just means they're we're planning in this region. Doesn't mean it's absolutely going to happen, but it's our indicator to know that something is being discussed or planned. We have not been made aware at this point in time of any additional developments in this area that are in concept phase. And the two that I mentioned, AMS and Powers Estates, even though they were listed in several years ago, the county's kind of come back to us and said, we don't see it moving forward. They're basically going to have to start completely over if they want to move forward with these developments.
What we're really concerned about right now is Hager Crossing,
Yes, sir.
because that's the one that's already there and it's just not been developed yet. So we don't know the concept of how much the actual increased attendance would be for that.
That's correct. And what we know from the city of Hagerstown for the Hager's Crossing development is for those remaining homes to go through. So it would be over in this portion and this portion of the development. They would actually have to go in and make certain improvements, a connection to McDade Road. There's certain other things that they have to go through before they can actually start that development. That being said, obviously with the construction of a new school starting, we're hearing that there is some interest, and more interest than what we've seen over the past several years during the recent recession.
There's a lot of farmland out there that's potentially going to be developed, not knowing if it's going to be housing or if it's going to be commercial, but thinking ahead, now's the time to be doing that.
Yes, sir. The majority of the area is out towards the west, I believe, is farms, and it's zoned industrial commercial at this point in time, but that doesn't mean it couldn't change in the future.
Right, right.
Also, West City was designed as well. 22 is what we know about looking at. More to come along.
Also in our pupil generation reports, when we start to talk about where population is likely to grow, we again have conversations with developers, we have conversations with the county and the city, and one of the things that we know is depending on what kind of development, we know what kind of numbers will come out of that. They have very good and solid methodology for calculating how many kids might come out of an apartment complex versus single-family housing, things like that. So I think we stay pretty current, Mike, with not only what's rumored out there, but what's moved beyond the rumor stage. Because as soon as somebody speaks to the county about we want to do this, if they start to have that conversation about land use and stuff, then we know about it.
One of the things that we did take into consideration was that aspect of let's not do a new school and then fill it to 100% and then figure out what to do from there. So we've actually kept that capacity down somewhat, and with the intention of the awareness that that realistically Hager's Crossings is really the, I think Powers Estates probably been on the books haven't done anything in all that period of time, so unlikely.
And with 170 possible new units in Hager's Crossing, I think the pupil generation rate for that type of construction is about 0.4.
You have to do single-family homes, correct?
Single family, if it's 0.4 times 170 makes about 70 students. And our current projection for September 2018 is 404 to 443, which is about 86 to 90% capacity. So there is, maybe if they completely built out every single one of those, we'd start pushing up against our limit, but just based on those numbers, there's a good bit of space to fill in there.
Yes, sir.
Maybe Chad, too, for the benefit of the people who might be watching, and in answer to Mr. Gesford's question, you could talk about if I'm correct, most of the planning with the permits department and taking that kind of detailed look at each development occurs during our educational facilities master plan process?
Yes, sir.
And that's what then feeds into this document?
Yes, sir.
Is that right?
And these numbers match the educational facility master plan, and during the process, as we discussed them with the FIAC, I also called over to make sure there hadn't been any changes that I hadn't heard about since the last time I spoke to both the city and the county permits department.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Realizing all of what you've just said about trying to keep West City at a manageable number of students to accommodate for any additional growth, I'm wondering if the committee discussed giving any more relief to Lincolnshire in that their numbers are still high there, in expanding that portion of Lincolnshire students that are headed towards West City. Was there any thought given to increasing those numbers to give more relief to Lincolnshire?
That's one of the other,
Another piece coming.
Okay.
in,
All right.
in group 2.
Okay, thank you.
And group 3, actually.
Okay.
Yep. So, yes, ma'am.
All right.
We did consider that and looked to offer as much relief as we could come up with.
All right,
So.
thank you.
Chad, just to stay on Group 1, number 2, the Conakajig piece. What can you maybe expand a little bit on what the recommendation, or whether we're going to stay in the same feeder pattern for those children?
I can answer that. I'm very proud that we did not disrupt any feeder patterns
Secondary.
at all, except for that one island, which is recommendation number 14. All the students who are currently attending Conakajig will still stay in that same pattern as will the Winter Street students. And any of the other recommendations in group 2 and 3, all of the feeder patterns stay the same.
I bring that up because historically,
Yes. Yes.
I wanted the public to understand.
Yes. And I think we also reiterated when we presented in June that Winter Street is an older school, as is Conakajig, and most of the recommendations that we have, those students will be attending a newer school or a new school. And so those considerations were also taken into consideration when we looked at the process.
You can always come back, but if it pleases the board, I'll move on. So the Group 2 recommendations, as were previously pointed out, are also proposed to be effective in the 2016 school year, along with the open new West City Elementary School. First, boundary realignment recommendation number 5, reassigns approximately 22 K-5 students from the closing Conakajig attendance zone Clear Spring Elementary. Second on this map, here's the current Conakajig Elementary attendance zone shape, and the portion that we're looking at is this light blue piece that kind of goes down here, and show you the whole attendance zone and where each of the components are going. just to kind of make it a little bit easier to see how all the pieces fit together. But again, this portion kind of follows along the Conacojig Creek. We'll zoom in just a little bit closer here. So here's US 40. The one component at the finger of the creek is the landfill. Now this is the only portion of this road that actually comes out onto US 40. All the other parcels and areas of this road actually come out. They have to travel west to Rockdale Road and then south down to US 40. When the committee looked at that, they said west to Rockdale Road, keep traveling to Tree School. A couple other landmarks, as you can see, in blue on the bottom. This is the current Conacojig Elementary School. The portions up here are actually the Malginsville Elementary, and then this portion of green here is the actual boundary realignment recommendation number 6. 59 K through 5 students from the closing Conacojig Elementary to Malginsville Elementary's attendance zone. So, in keeping with the Conacojig theme, again, here's the Conacojig Elementary attendance zone. The green portion is the current Malginsville Elementary School attendance zone, with Malginsville being here. And the light green is the portion of Conacojig that's proposed to be realigned to Malginsville Elementary School. Zooming in a little bit closer to this area, you can see Broadfooting Road, Gossard Mill Road, and then of course Greencastle Pike all feed up and then go over. Again, you can also follow the Conacojig Creek and then Rockdale Road off to the west. And again, at the end of this, we'll show you how that attendance zone breaks up in locations. Boundary realignment recommendation number 7. Approximately 176 K through 5 students from the closing Winter Street Elementary attendance zone to Salem Avenue Elementary attendance zone. Now, this map we did just a little bit differently to try to highlight the current Salem district, what's leaving at the moment, and what could potentially be coming in. The current Salem district is this turquoise area and this purple area. Now, the purple area, you may remember from recommendation number 1. That's what's proposed to go to the new West City Elementary, which would then leave this turquoise area of Salem Avenue Elementary. The current Winter Street Elementary attendance zone is this little point here, and the area that's proposed to go to Salem Avenue would be basically the northern portion of the existing Winter Street Elementary. So here's West Washington Street and West Washington Avenue, where they come down and connect. West Franklin Street. Basically, it's portions north of West Washington Street of the Winter Street area that would then go to Salem Avenue. Now, this entire area is located within a 1-mile radius of the existing Salem Avenue Elementary School. If you fly by air and would actually draw a circle around it. There's a strong potential for walkers. It probably is worth noting. One of the things the committee discussed was 5th graders from Winter Street Elementary used to actually attend Salem Avenue Elementary years ago. So that was another component as part of, again, all discussion summary that's included in the report. So if you have any additional questions in the future or during this presentation, we'd be happy to address.
Some of those issues there, that aspect of, sure, we're in essence saying Winter Street is closing and West City is opening and transport to West City, but in reality, we didn't do that simply because we would literally have to drive by and transport students past Salem Avenue to get to West City, and so that doesn't make any sense to do that, and that's where some of these recommendations come.
And also, we spoke to the principal, and because many of these students have been at a school where the parents are able to walk to functions and the students walk, that these students are still able to walk and the parents can attend the school functions as well.
That was a huge issue.
Yeah. Yeah.
Boundary realignment recommendation number 8. K through 5 students from the closing Winter Street Elementary to Bester Elementary School. Now, this one we're going to actually have to go into Group 3 to kind of conceptualize the whole district, and we'll show that at the end of Group 3. But the current Bester Elementary attendance zone is this blue area here. Up here is, again, the Winter Street Elementary attendance zone. The portion in white is from the previous recommendation. And this portion that's south of West Washington Street is the portion that's proposed in this recommendation to go to the Bester Elementary School. As a reminder, of course, we just opened the new Bester Elementary School this year with an increased capacity of 608 students. Looking a little closer at this area, you can see that it's basically the portion that's bounded by West Washington Street and South Burhans Boulevard, or US 11. This area is located with existing Bester Elementary School. So again, close proximity. Right now, when you look at it, you'll notice that it's not contiguous. And we'll take a look at that in recommendation number 10, and again in Group 3, and then show how that can become a contiguous solid boundary. The last recommendation of Group 2 is recommendation number 9. Oh, yes, sir.
Can I ask one question about number 8?
Yes, sir.
That I didn't quite get as I read it, and maybe it's because enrollment at Bester is declining, but this says we're reassigning 67 to 75 students, and it's only going to increase their enrollment by a couple of %. Is that because Bester's, and unless I missed it, I didn't see another place where we're taking students out of Bester, or would be taking students out of Bester. How, those numbers don't add up. Help me.
Okay. I'd have to look at the sheets.
Bester's enrollment declining that quickly over the next 5 years, we think?
Based on
4 years?
The most current projections, it was to decline. However, one of the things that the committee looked at this past fall when we reviewed the current information was this year's Bester Elementary attendance values. So we looked at the spike that we had discussed in kindergarten, and that was one of the considerations that resulted in a change to one of the recommendations that will be in Group 3, where we actually didn't send as many students to Bester Elementary. So the committee, while we were working off the most current projections, they gave thought to what happens if we see the trend continue at Bester. Could that number go up a little higher? So while this shows it actually going down to 88%, they actually gave some consideration to, if the trend continues, we want to have a little bit of room so we're not overpopulating the new Bester Elementary to a higher percentage.
So where did you put kindergarten kids in, or incoming kindergarten kids? If you're bringing Bester down a little bit, where are they going? Is that in recommendation 3?
I think to Dr. Harding's question, the numbers don't add up. Generally as we're adding, we're seeing percentages go up.
Right.
We were projecting that Bester will flatten out and go down. And we were actually, as part of the redistricting effort, that we're going to place another recommendation to help a school into Bester as well. They decided not to do that one. We have an unusual spike. We have kindergarten classes start out this year at 110 at Bester. Their normal class sizes are running in the 70s, 80s on the high end, and actually have classes under 70. I think their 5th grade's extremely small. There's nothing there that indicates that we'll see another 110 kindergarten children come in next year. But the committee looked at it and said, let's not overpopulate Bester. So we do expect Bester to decline, except we have this blip on the radar for kindergarten with no explanation. There's no new housing. There's no reason for it to go up. Birth rates are extremely low. There's no reason to expect it to come in again at 110. But at a caution, they kept it a little bit lower. But to your point, Dr. Harding, we see numbers going in, but the percentage is not going up at that rate. is because we expect declining enrollment in the current Bester district.
So
But we
what are
do
you
have an
projecting for
anomaly
an
that we're looking at.
If you look at page 48 of the report, Bester Elementary School, without the proposed, without the reduced change, Bester Elementary is projected all of 2018 76% of the growth.
What are you projecting for a kindergarten class? An incoming, just back to the traditional 70 or 80 then?
That would have been for that projection. However, again, when the committee went back and reviewed it this fall based on what we saw this fall.
Get the anomaly. And so what you're doing is you're rolling the anomaly up because you don't know that they're going to go anywhere.
Right.
But you've come back to a more reasonable kindergarten class.
Split the difference on kindergarten as we're working with Public Pathways. I think they were projecting it to go back to a normal. I think, Chad, what we've actually last discussed, we're splitting that difference between 110 and the normal to give us a little bit of leeway.
That makes sense. I'm just
Right.
looking at trying to make sure I understand the assumptions that are behind the numbers here. And I knew there had to be an assumption there. I wanted to be sure I knew what it was. So thank you.
Could I just stay on the pre-K or kindergarten? I know that we're going to maybe put a pre-K more students into a pre-K. Was any of that considered in some of these classroom capacities with that pilot?
I think the goal, as they looked at things, was to try to even out, pain would be the wrong word, but try to distribute everything as equally as possible. And then if we had the windfall of pre-K or universal pre-K everywhere, we would try to, absorb that in every school at about the same rate.
Because we already have the race to the top. I think we made last year for the expansion. So I'm just wondering where, that's a done deal. We know that, except where we put these students and where the demand. So is there enough room? And I know the Judy Center, part of that was money could be used to expand our.
We've talked a little bit with Matt about the Judy Center. The Judy Center serves 2 places right now, and we're even thinking about a potential, I won't say relocation, continue to serve Bester, but possibly relocate the center itself in another building to accommodate more space at Bester for pre-K. So we have a number of ideas, and we've been talking with Matt to look at how we'd accommodate that, and we think that we can. Christy's aware of it. She believes she can accommodate pre-K there at Bester. Correct.
I know I'm mixing facilities with program, but they draw from each other.
Right. Matt, I'm not going to, but actually some of the recommendations will actually help create some potential capacity for the expansion grant to a degree, correct? Okay. Moving on to the final recommendation of Group 2, recommendation number 9, which reassigns approximately 112 K through 5 students from both the Ruth Ann Monroe Primary and Eastern Elementary attendance zone to Salem Avenue Elementary. So the current Eastern Ruth Ann Monroe attendance zone is this white area that comes up to Salem Avenue. The portion that's being considered is this light turquoise area right here, the very westernmost tip of the current boundary. It's basically from North Burhans Boulevard over. These students are all within a 1-mile radius of Salem Avenue Elementary. This was one of the areas that the committee was very interested in seeing move to Salem Avenue Elementary during discussion, along with discussions from the principal.
And again, these are the students that are the population that the parents don't necessarily have transportation, and it is very close to the school. And it made sense that we put those students there instead of having to keep them transported to Eastern and Ruth Ann Monroe. And they would still get the same Title I benefits.
Just to do a brief recap of what Group 2, along with Group 1, accomplishes, this is the current Conacajig Elementary attendance zone. Based on the recommendations that we've heard so far, The purple is the first group recommendation that would go to West City Elementary. The blue would go to Clear Spring Elementary, and the green would go to, I hit that with my finger, sorry about that. The green would go to Morgansville Elementary, and thus it would close Conicajig Elementary attendance zone. The current Winter Street Elementary attendance zone sits within the center of Hagerstown. Two recommendations, again, the portion north of West Washington Avenue and West Washington Street would go to Salem Avenue Elementary, and the southern portion would go to Bester Elementary. Looking at the current Salem Avenue Elementary attendance zone as it sits today, with the proposed recommendations, the two gray portions would then become part of the new West City Elementary, so they leave Salem. And then the portion from Winter Street and the portion from Eastern and Ruth Ann Monroe would then round out a new Salem Avenue Elementary attendance zone district.
Can I ask him a question about number 9? That's the reassignment from Ruth Ann Monroe Eastern to Salem, I suppose. Was any thought given to dealing with the rest of that peninsula, island, whatever it is that sticks out? If you go back a few slides.
Yeah. There we go. So here,
So you've sort of lopped off one peninsula on the end. Was any thought given to the whole rest of that? Because as I look at, I mean, Bester's close by, Pangbourne's on the way. I know that there's some enrollment challenges there, but McKay-Daub sort of in that area. Why keep that? I don't know what else to call it. When you look at this, which doesn't look like the others, I think it's that little section there. Was any thought given to addressing that?
We did actually look at that, and I think what our situation was, there was no place to actually move them, that it didn't actually overpopulate a given school. And there wasn't a way to really make that and division a little bit further. That's a pretty populated area there, and I think we were looking at maybe even as many as 100 students that potentially would be impacted by doing that, and that would have overcrowded Salem, and it wouldn't have worked to go to Bester, and so I think we just left it then and just divided that and put the ones that, in essence, could go to Salem there with some type of geographical boundary that worked. Because we did look at that issue there as to, is there a way to do this and make that work?
In the distance those students would travel, I guess, is not really any further than students at the other side of the eastern attendance zone, so I get that.
You just go down 40.
Right. Okay, thank you.
okay. Group 3. Group 1 and Group 2 are both contingent upon the opening of the new West City school. Group the recommendation either of the 2015-2016 school year or the 2016-2017 school year at the board's discretion. These recommendations are not contingent on the opening or closing of a new attendance boundary, so we'll go through, but that was one of the points of the report that the committee decided was important to share. First boundary realignment recommendation number 10 reassigns 0 K through 5 students from Lincolnshire Elementary to Bester Elementary's attendance zone. So this is a bit of a change from the progress report that was shared back in May, June of this past year. Whereas before, this very tip of Lincolnshire actually came over and picked up this development. When the committee went back to the anomaly that we saw at Bester Elementary and took that into some common sense consideration and potential worst case scenario carrying those revised numbers forward, they said, you know what, we don't want to create a problem at Bester. We're going to hedge the bets a little bit, and we're just going to create a contiguous boundary for this portion of Winter Street up here that's proposed in recommendation number 8. So that was part of their discussion this past fall. So this area is actually just the railroad yard that currently sits between the current Bester Elementary attendance zone and the Winter Street Elementary attendance zone that's proposed to be realigned. We'll show a map again at the end to show what your elementary attendance zone would look like. Recommendation number 11.
So
Oh, yes, ma'am.
check back on that, just to be sure. We're reassigning 0 number of students.
That's correct.
It just made it look,
Sort of
Neater.
an
I just wanted to
administrative
be sure
change.
That wasn't a typo somehow. Okay.
Just an administrative change to make a contiguous boundary through a railroad yard.
Got it.
Recommendation reassigns approximately 53 K through 5 students from Lincolnshire Elementary attendance. So looking at Shire Elementary's attendance zone, it's this white portion up here at the top. Of course, the pink is what's our West City in the Group 1 recommendations. The little blue tip is recommendation number 10 that has no students. And then this little orange portion down here is actually recommendation number 11. Of course, I'll take. We are currently sitting right here at the new Center for Educational Services along Downsville Pike. So, and the proposed Fountain Rock Elementary School is just off of Lappins Road, which is a couple miles down the road. This portion is actually the Oak Ridge Gardens, Town Oak Village, Oak Ridge Park. Just as kind of a bearing, here's Interstate 70, the stoplight, Dunkin' Donuts for stop in the morning. And as it falls up to Maryland.
You have a fast food issue.
I do, I know. We got coffee and fast. So this is this portion that would then go and provide some additional enrollment relief to Lincolnshire Elementary School, and then would also populate Fountain Rock Elementary, which is currently proposed to be around 64% of its state-rated capacity in 2018. So again, taking from a school that's overpopulated and sending to an adjacent school that is underpopulated.
So Chad,
Yes, ma'am.
going back to the chart that shows the state-rated capacity, even with that change, it's still showing Lincolnshire as high, right?
Is about 101, 102. Yes, ma'am. So
So I guess back to my question earlier, has any discussion happened about giving more relief to Lincolnshire by either sending, well, in my mind, it would make sense to send them to West City as opposed to sending them to Fountain Rock because of the numbers at Fountain Rock, but to anything to give more relief to Lincolnshire? Was there discussion?
we and I've got to go back to the Vester discussion. So when we saw the announcement, and we did a work scenario, and that was part of what the revised recommendation number 10, where there's no students involved. When we looked at Lincolnshire Elementary's, the recommendation area, Lincolnshire was down from what we had projected. And as we started looking at that area, we believe that it may be a little higher in 2018. So whereas we thought best, we think Lincolnshire might actually be a little higher. There's no development area. It's an established several years of a pretty high rate that we couldn't really explain. And we looked at a worst case scenario, and then we looked at a probable scenario based off of this September's enrollments. And when the committee looked at that, they said, boy, it's probably going to really come in somewhere around 90%. But because these are the projected numbers, 101%, which is still 20 to 30 students less than what we've seen the past 2 years at this school. There's 3 portables at Lincolnshire Elementary right now. So the committee were hedged their bets with Vester. They also hedged the bets a little bit with Lincolnshire and said we'd like to take more, but we really don't see a good opportunity or another place to take more. And based on the numbers that we saw this September, I believe the committee was pretty happy with that and decided to move that forward as a recommendation. I'll defer to.
I think it really was a matter of we were able to bring that state-rated capacity from about 107% to about 101% within the Lincolnshire. And then as we looked at other options and other places to move, it became, well, do we move it here or here? But they really weren't readily available. So we said, well, we're at least improving our situation, even though it's not where we want it to be, we're at least improving it, and said, I think as we look at the totals, we're just going to leave it at that and present that as our recommendations. And, we could potentially go back and look at that, but we thought we were at least improving the situation as it was.
Okay, boundary realignment recommendation number 12 reassigns approximately 43 K through 5 students from the Williamsport Elementary Attendance Zone to the Fountain Rock Elementary Attendance Zone. So the current Williamsport Elementary Attendance Zone is this area here. The area in orange is the Fountain Rock Elementary Attendance Zone. You can see the two facilities. This area is actually the easternmost portion of Williamsport Elementary's attendance zone. So you can see, I quit putting my paper up there, I apologize. Interstate 81 here in blue, Interstate 70. Again, this is where we're currently having this meeting today. This area includes the Sterling Oaks development, which is right here. And then it includes portions of Edward Dowd Road. This recommendation provides some enrollment up a little bit more of Fountain Rock Elementary.
The committee actually received several correspondences from the families that were going to be impacted by this recommendation. We received a petition from some of the families there, and we looked at looking at keeping those students at Williamsport, but by keeping them at Williamsport, it maintained a high state-rated capacity number at Williamsport, and we felt that relief was the better consideration for those students.
What would the enrollment be there in 2014 if these students weren't moved? It says this will reduce Williamsport Elementary from 103% in 2014 to 102 to 103 in 2018. What would it be in 2018 without this, Steve?
In 2018, it was projected
Probably back here.
623 students. I believe it's 109% of state-rated capacity.
That's on page 4. I should be able to.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry for
No.
asking the question when I had the resources to get it.
Page was it on? Did he say?
Oh, I see. Okay.
623. So,
So rather than it being at 623 students in 2018, it would be at 580 or 588.
yes, sir.
So it effectively takes about 50 students and moves them 45 or 50.
And we did look at that as far as, from a transportation and a timeliness aspect. I don't think from a timing standpoint, it's going to be any different for them to get to Fountain Rock, because they'll just be able to come right back off of Sterling Road over to Downsville Pike and go straight down. So from a time travel distance for the students to get to Fountain Rock, I don't think there'll be any different than for them to go the other way and hit a couple lights and turn into Williamsport Elementary. So that was one of the things that I think we felt, really, and Fountain Rock is just a nice community type school there, and it's got a lot of capacity, and we didn't see it as just the better option for them. That would be, our recommendation, and you'll have to look at what you want to do with that.
Boundary realignment recommendation number 13, reassigns approximately 30 K-5 students from the Pangbourne Elementary Attendance Zone to Potomac Heights Elementary. So the current Pangbourne Attendance Zone is this white area here. The current Potomac Heights Elementary Attendance Zone is the yellow area here with the two schools designated. And the portion that's actually proposed to be realigned is just this little corner here. It's pretty highly densely populated, but it's just 38 students Again, it's this area right here. It's basically properties along North Mulberry Street and Wayside Avenue. So these students would then go to Potomac Heights, provide just a little bit of additional relief to Pangbourne Elementary.
On this one, Chad, why not take more students?
I
And this will be the second year in a row, if we were to move forward with this will be the second year in a row that we're sort of chasing enrollment issues at Pangbourne. Why not solve it once and for all? Or is there a way to solve it once and for all? And if this is only going to put Potomac Heights at 91% or so, I mean, I hate to say push it up higher, but if Pangbourne is still going to be over 100, why did we stop here instead of going further?
The answer,
Yeah, one of the things that I remember we met with when we did the Potomac, or the Pangbourne realignment, and met with them there, the principal at Potomac Heights, they actually talked about that school, and with the particular configuration of the school and the age of the school, it's not as well designed to be able to handle sort of more of the multi-purpose type usages that some of the newer schools offer. And I think, it became much more difficult for him to accept more students. I mean, if we push Potomac Heights up more near into that 100% type range, I think they're going to have a more difficult time handling that than a newer school such as Pangbourne there being able to handle the just because they don't have as much space in some of those open areas that they can create some classroom type situations. I don't know if that helps or
No,
not.
it does. I mean, thinking about having been in Potomac Heights, you're right. It is
mess.
It is a little different, more difficult to lay out that way. But
I'm going to say, is Potomac Heights the other option? I know some students were moved from Pangbourne to Paramount.
Yes.
So you also have Morgansville out that way. I mean, I
There are
would
other
think
options,
there will
yeah.
be other options as opposed to just directing them to Potomac Heights. So I'm in agreement with Dr. Hardings. I think now's the time to look to do something more for Pangbourne.
I think those students would have to cross several school boundary lines if we do a Morgansville or Potomac Heights. The ones that we did for Pangbourne to Paramount were at the northern end of the school boundary zone. And when you look at this, there really isn't a good way to start cutting off students and putting them in other schools, except you'd have to cross other boundary lines.
I think Paramount came in lower than what we expected. If we see that as an ongoing trend, maybe that's something to look at. Is there a way to handle more children there at Paramount? But there's also potential for growth out that way. As you recall, at one time we were looking for property for a potential North County school if a number of developments out there were to take off. So it's certainly something to consider.
well,
Cortland, the one development that's still growing right now, and doesn't that go to Potomac, part of that go to Potomac Heights?
No, it goes to
Portland
Pangbourne.
is split now between Pangbourne and Paramount.
Or between
That's the
Pangbourne
one
and Paramount? Isn't that the one area, though, that's still growing, that they're still building?
don't believe
I don't
they're
think
building.
so.
There may
Not this
be
moment.
there may be one or two of those homes left the town, but the apartments are completely built out.
The apartments are the only ones that really generate us.
Generate
really,
Right.
Right,
students.
but I thought they were building another apartment.
No, what they're building is a townhouse for the apartment users.
There was some discussion of some interest of the developer in converting some of the apartments. And at this point in time, I think the last we reported on that, we had not heard of any change of them changing the number of units per the actual space. I think we had alerted the facility committee of what we were hearing, but again, nothing has, our understanding is that has not moved forward, and it doesn't appear to be. So,
if the committee's going to go back and, if I understood the beginning of this meeting correctly, if the committee's going to go back and look at things based on feedback we get today, I'd like to suggest, maybe to help address my concern and Mrs. Williams' concern, is what if we had to move another 50 students or 40 students out of Pangbourne? What if instead of the enrollment right now being at 101%, what if it was at 107 or 105? What would your recommendation be? It may be that you get to a point where in order to deal with that enrollment, you have to do one of these domino things, and I'm not suggesting that's what we should do now, but with all the attention and detail you've paid to looking at the various considerations, I'd ask, what would you do if we asked you to move another 40 or 50 students? Or would your recommendation be to just let Pangbourne remain over capacity at that amount? But I think answering that question would help me know whether we're chasing something or whether we really think solving what looks like a year-to-year issue would be a much larger lift.
I think maybe later we can pull up a map of the Pangbourne district. I think the only possible solution to that would be to send them to Ruth Ann Monroe and Eastern, and then you start overpopulating that area where there's even more potential for higher growth. So, you know, we kind of.
So your recommendation would be if there were 50 more students to leave them at Pangbourne?
But I think it's something the committee can certainly go back and look at. Part of the interest from Pangbourne is that they don't lose their Robinwood Drive area and some of that population. To Mary's point, which would be kind of that first slice that we would continue to push that way if the solution had anything to do with Eastern and Ruth Ann Monroe. Solution might have something to do with another school. So certainly come back and look at it more closely, but that was some of the consideration of why not just start moving that line down. Part of the 10 items that the FIAC, or excuse me, the JCA and JCAR and state policy requires is that we look at all the, there's 10 factors that are listed in each of these sections. So we're trying to look at farm rates and look at those types of things. And part of that goes way back prior to, I think, anybody here being involved with redistricting when Eastern was established. How we got that quirky piece right in the middle of town was largely due to when that committee, and I was not part of it or any part of that process, but as I recall the discussion, ethnicity, farm rate, educational opportunities. That's how we kind of ended up with that finger down in the middle of Hagerstown.
What if
trying to balance some of that.
Could you gain capacity, and I'm just playing with the board members' request, if you rethought the configuration of Ruth Ann Monroe and Eastern? If all of a sudden Eastern wasn't a 3-5 building and Pangbourne wasn't a K-1-2 building, if you actually had two side-by-side elementary schools that are traditional in orientation, could you gain capacity by sending some kids then closer to where they're homeschooled?
Probably wouldn't gain capacity because capacity is counted on spaces over 500 square feet, so the capacity remained the same.
But you'd be sending some kindergarten kids back to schools that are more closely aligned with their home, so you'd be bumping up a bunch of schools by blowing up that attendance zone. And hence you would still have the same square footage, so now you could bring kids in from other areas. And I'm just trying to deal with the Pangbourne issue.
I think the committee can go back and study a variety of options if that's the will of the board.
I don't know that that's the answer, but I know that's a thought that you might be able to create capacity by sending 5 or 10 kindergartners back to schools that are 98, 95%, not really touch them. With some historically low birth rates, you have the opportunity in some schools to put kindergartners back, but it changes the configuration of those two schools.
It might even potentially could create a situation where, how we always talk about how kids don't come in those neat packages of 25 units. When we split into 2 K-5 units, that could create odd splits where I don't have quite enough for 3 rounds, but too many for 2 rounds at both school situations. But it's certainly, again, something we can look at.
Chad's always looking for something to do. So.
Yeah.
It's why one of the reasons why when we had our first work session, I suggested what would the I asked, what would the attendance zones look like countywide if you just could start with a blank slate? And it's trying to address this kind of question.
But I think one of the factors that we really considered in all of our recommendations was the accessibility of the students that were moving to the needs that they might have. And moving students from the Pangbourne area that is a Title I school to a non-Title I school may create other issues in the school system with having to add more staff to accommodate that. And but again, this Group 3 recommendations are recommendations that could happen next year or the following year. So as a committee, we can go back and look at this because it wouldn't have to take effect because it doesn't affect the West City schools.
I just don't want to be back here with Pangbourne again next year.
Yes.
I mean, nobody enjoys going through this process. And that's why we appreciate so much the time and effort that you all put into answering all of these questions. But if we can solve this problem for a future board, I think that's worth trying to do. If we can't, we can't. But I'd like to see what we can do.
And at the end of this, and we're down to just a few more minutes, I'll summarize where I think my colleagues have had some concerns, and then we can decide as a board to send these back for further work. Okay. Chad, any?
Okay. The last recommendation, and again, this is the only secondary recommendation of the report. This is recommendation number 14, which reassigns approximately 4 grades 6 through 8 students from the Northern Middle attendance zone to the Western Heights attendance zone. So with the new software, we located an island. It's, of course, the green attendance area is the current Western Heights attendance zone. The yellow area is the Northern Middle attendance zone. To zoom in a little closer, you can see that this area along Pennsylvania Avenue is currently zoned to Northern Middle School. The committee recommended that that area be placed back in with the rest of the Western Heights Middle. These students all currently attend North Hagerstown High School. They would all continue to attend North Hagerstown High School, but this is just a little development that based on our increasing technology, we realized with the parcel lines that it had become an island and was not a just to summarize, so the Group 3 recommendations, the existing Bester Elementary School is currently designated as such with recommendation number 8 from Group 2 and recommendation number 10 from Group 3. It is proposed to become a contiguous attendance boundary that would look something like this. The current Lincolnshire Elementary attendance boundary as it stands today, with the recommendations from this report, recommendation that would go to West City Elementary, the no student area that would go to Bester Elementary, and then the orange portion that would come down to Fountain Rock Elementary. It would result in a new attendance boundary that would look like this and provide some enrollment relief. The current Williamsport Elementary attendance boundary looks like this. The proposed area is this little corner that would come down to Fountain Rock Elementary, and the new Williamsport Elementary attendance boundary would look just a little bit smaller. Looking at Fountain Rock Elementary then, this is the current Fountain Rock Elementary attendance boundary, and with the 2 recommendations from Group 3, it would take the piece from Williamsport and the little piece from Lincolnshire, providing some enrollment relief to both of those attendance zones and schools. And then the existing Potomac Heights Elementary attendance boundary. Of course, it's going to pick up this little corner from Pangbourne to provide some relief to Pangbourne. And then the existing Pangbourne Elementary attendance district that would then send this corner to Potomac Heights.
Okay. Great. Any other questions that cover as we went through Thad's presentation. What I've taken away and from the conversation is there still seems to be a level of concern with Lincolnshire. Mrs. Williams, did you feel your answers were satisfactory? Would you like to see any further exploration by FIAC on that issue?
I would.
Is there consensus or to look at that concern, even though we understand some of the issues around it, maybe look at that again? Yes?
I think maybe ask them to do the same thing that we've sort of asked on Pangborn, which is
Pangborn,
if you
there.
had to take another 30 students, well, how would you do that?
And not just expand what you've already done, but really maybe explore totally different concepts.
I think there are several schools. Lincolnshire's one, Pangborn is another, and Williamsport Elementary, I think, is one that we
And
need to keep.
Williamsport was on my list as well. Even though I know what I think I heard from the chairs is that was probably the most controversial one during your discussion. I assume it will continue to be, and we're not trying to avoid controversy if it's the right thing to do, but you may want to add that to your let's just look at it again list one more time. Anything I've didn't capture? Okay. I know we need to at some point as a board discuss group 3 as being separate from 1 and 2 as to when they might be enacted, but I think that conversation may be premature right now until we hear back again from FIAC, so we'll figure out a way, we'll coordinate staff as to when you might, as a group, be able to meet and what time you would need to come back to us with some of these adjustments. And then I think, Mr. Trotta, if you had a few minutes to maybe just go over next steps. I know we're running a little short on time.
As Mr. Trotta comes forward, one of the things I'm going to encourage the board early, and I'll kind of reserve the right to revisit this comment, is that whatever changes we make to our attendance systems, we make at one time. I think it's much easier for us to communicate, and quite honestly, I think it's easier for families who get caught up in multiple moves. And, you know, I would just encourage the board to consider making all of them at once rather than in several steps. But again,
So I'm clear on what you're saying. Are you saying that we should vote on all of them at the same time, or
Not-
they
not
should all
necessar-
be implemented? at the
implemented,
same
not necessarily vote, because I think some present clearer options than others. But I think when it's all said and done, the implementation should happen in the same school year.
So not simply.
That would just be my personal preference. And please understand, I understand operationally you could do it. I just think from a political standpoint within our larger community, the confusion is not worth suffering.
Thank you. Mr. Trotta.
Yes, good morning. The next step in the process would be for the Facilities Committee to reconvene to consider the comments offered by the members of the board today, and also to consider other things that they feel may be appropriate. They would then come to the board at a public business meeting and present their report to the board. After that step, the board would then submit that plan, proposed plan, to the superintendent. The superintendent examines that proposed plan. The superintendent may adopt the plan. He may offer comments, or he may offer what's referred to as the superintendent's report, which would be something that would be a bit different than what the committee offered. The next step in the process would be that report and/or the superintendent's report would be disseminated to the public. We work very closely with the communications office to make sure that that is widely disseminated. It must, in particular, be disseminated to those schools, to those parents, to those students that will be directly affected by the decisions that are part of the proposed plan. There is then a public hearing. The policy requires that the superintendent schedule that public hearing. It is an opportunity for the members of the board, once again, to hear from the community
and to assess comments that have been provided by the community. Then the board would schedule a meeting where it would take a public vote on the proposed plan. So those are the various steps in the process going forward. I would note there's a number of procedural considerations, one of which is under the administrative regulation. There is an April 30th timeline for rendering a decision by the board. This is to give parents and students an opportunity to adjust whatever adjustments need to be made before the upcoming school year. The board can always adjust that April 30th timeline, but that is the objective going forward, that we want to make sure that the schedule is set up so that there's a public business meeting sometime prior to April 30th of this year when the board can take an official vote on the proposed plan.
And that is to give time for the appeal process.
Exactly, the
Okay.
appeal process, but also parents may have daycare concerns that they might have or other adjustments that they need to make. So that gives them sufficient time to adjust their calendar to make sure that on the upcoming school year that they're aware, number one, of the new attendance zones and that they can adjust their calendars accordingly.
And I assume the FIAC committee has this list.
We will provide that information to them, yes.
I would hope that, I know everyone has busy schedules, but since we haven't decided whether we're going to try to implement Group 3 differently or not, but we still may need FIAC to move forward in a timely manner. Thank you again for, it's a great job. This is probably maybe the third large redistricting I've been part of as a board member, and I served on FIAC, I think, as Mrs. Fisher for several years, and this process is a huge, speaks well of staff and the FIAC members and committees, so thank you. We are going to the next item at this point. Thank you very much. A 5-minute break.
That would be appreciated.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
Which is fine.
What are we coming back to?
We're giving some property back.
You need to read the facility.
Oh, that's,
That would have answered all of the
I don't care what you do. Girls Inc. wants it, I'd give it to them.